Here is the Astro Library that contains a dozen years of various lectures and workshops by evolutionary astrologers. It's divided into 3 different sections. You can subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or a recurring monthly that you can cancel at any time. And of course, those of you who are here are Segment 1 students, and so if at any point you want to expand your studies into Segment 2 or 3, you can save $50 as a current student. You just enter the coupon code SECRET, see it there in blue, upon checkout. Meaning when you first choose the item, it'll show up at the full price $300, and when you get to checkout, there will be a spot to apply the coupon code, and it'll take the $50 off. And of course, if you want, on any of those of you who are Segment 1 students, if you want to see a Segment 2 class before you purchase, you can ask for a free sample class download. Here are future classes. As you can see, next month in November, we're going to work with forecasting, transits, secondary progressions, and solar arcs. And then in December, we're going to work with the differences between all of the various house systems. And so here's today's subject. And as we start out, this is the 360-degree circle that many of you have become familiar with. In your studies with me, it divides down the circle into its 8 phases. As you can see, these are 45-degree divisions of the 360 circle. And you can see Nu is Yang phase, Crescent is Yin phase. You can see those 8 phases are energy moving out from the center Yang and energy moving in towards the center. This slide here comes in your materials, and if you've had your materials for a while and you're working off one of the old ones and you don't have this new one yet, I'll have it available on the Segment 1 area as fall gets underway, and my goal is to have all of the materials to Segment 1 and Segment 2 uploaded digitally, so you can have everything available in your students area of the website for that. So that this will be handy for you, and just give me a little time here, but I'll make it so that it's available that you can print it out and use it. So you're also familiar with this slide as well, and so we're going to review this for a moment. When we work with determining aspects between any 2 planets in evolutionary astrology, we always compare the faster moving planet to the slower moving planet. And we compare that in a counterclockwise manner, because if you look at how the zodiac moves around the circle, 0 degrees Aries, 1 degree Aries, 2 degrees Aries, it moves in a counterclockwise fashion. And therefore, that is how the planets move around the circle as well. Now, one of the things that Jeffrey Green always taught was that all planets are compared to the sun. There are those in the world of evolutionary astrology who differentiate from that a little bit, and I'm kind of like in the middle. For years I was comparing all the planets to the sun, and I've just been kind of exploring comparing the sun to some of the slower moving planets. I can't say that I have a definite opinion either way, but I'm entertaining that possibility. Having said that, I'll work with it as the slide is here. And so when we are going to compare any 2 planets, we always start with the slower moving planet. So in this example, I have Saturn making a new phase to the sun. We use the wide orbs when we are working with aspects. In evolutionary astrology, it is not unusual to use orbs between 5 to 10 degrees on either side of the exact aspect. We'll explore that here in a couple of slides as well. But we will use wide degrees anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees on either side, and that makes that orb anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees. And one of the reasons for that is because from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, every planet is in a relationship to every other planet. And they're in relationship by phase first. That is then followed through or fleshed out in detail by perhaps those two planets having a specific aspect within their phasal relationship. So if we're looking at Saturn compared to the Sun, we will start first of all with the Sun here at 13 degrees, 47 minutes Cancer. And as you can see right here with your green arrow that lines up with the Sun, to move towards Saturn, we end up moving from 13 to 26 degrees Cancer. So the Saturn is 13 degrees beyond the Sun. That's beyond that 10-degree orb. So it is moved beyond the conjunction, and it is actually in a new phase relationship to the Sun. If we look at Mercury to Pluto, which is the second example on this, we would start with Pluto. The line isn't quite lining up, but we start with Pluto at 10 degrees Leo, 35 minutes. And it is a slower moving planet. And if you follow this green circle, you move all the way around the circle to get to Mercury. And so Mercury is making a balsamic conjunction to Pluto. Mercury's at 9 degrees Leo, 50 minutes. And so it is less than 1 degree away from Pluto. But it is a balsamic conjunction versus Venus being 11 degrees away from Pluto. And this is this other green line over here starting with Pluto, but only going 11 degrees until we get to Venus, which is just beyond a new conjunction to Pluto. So this is the direction counterclockwise you will go when you are doing the comparison of a faster moving planet to a slower moving planet. Now we'll work with some of the math for this as well in a little bit. I'm just going over these slides to give you an overview of this. When we are determining aspects to the nodal axis, and in this you can also include points in space like the ascendant, midheaven, descendant, nadir. Those are the four angles, ascendant being the first house cusp, nadir fourth house cusp, descendant seventh house cusp, midheaven 10th house cusp. What we find is when we're working with the nodes of the moon, they tend to move in a mean motion that's retrograde. They're retrograde 90% of the time, which means that following these green arrows, they go clockwise, reversing through the zodiac, reversing through the houses. The points in space, these four angles, ascendant, midheaven, they also move in the same direction. They move in a clockwise direction. And as a matter of fact, a little tidbit for you is that every 4 minutes the ascendant moves a degree. Every 4 minutes the ascendant moves 1 degree. Now, more or less, the same thing would be true of the midheaven. Every 4 minutes, more or less, it moves a degree. And as you can see, as you are looking at this, it would go from 7 degrees to 8 degrees to 9 degrees with this example. So in evolutionary astrology, both the nodes of the moon and the points in space, ascendant midheaven, all move in a clockwise direction, appearing to reverse through the zodiac, although again, with the points in space ascendant, the zodiac moves as well, so it doesn't reverse the number like the nodes do. In evolutionary astrology, all of these points in space are compared to the planets. Some of you have heard this little story. Way back in the day when I took over Jeffrey School in 2002 and ran it for 6 years through 2008, that first year, there was another astrologer who was in Spirit World now, Adina Mather, and she went through all of Jeffrey's old message board and read through all the Q&A, and anytime there were questions looking at aspects to the nodal axis, 70% of the time this was Jeffrey's answer. 30% of the time he said the opposite. Compare the planets to the nodes. So we went with the 70% answer, and as I've worked with that since 2002, and even before that, it's what feels comfortable to me. Comparing the nodes to the planet, comparing the points in space to the planets. And so if we look at the example that we have here, what we are showing you is the planet Uranus and of course the north node and south node of the moon. And in this case, for both of them, you start with the planet, in this case Uranus, and you look at both of these green arrows. We'll work with this inside green arrow first of all and follow that around until we get to the south node. And the south node is making a gibbous opposition to Uranus. That south node is at 19 degrees Sag, 36 minutes. If it reversed itself back to 19 Sag, 9 minutes, it'd be exact opposition to Uranus. If it moved back to 18 degrees Sag, it'd be a full phase opposition. Now we do the same thing with the north node. We start with Uranus and we go all the way around the circle until we get to the north node at 19 degrees, Gemini, 36 minutes. You see that this is a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. As the north node would keep moving, it would eventually get exact conjunction to Uranus, and then reversing back to 18 degrees Gemini, it would be a new phase conjunction to Uranus. So in this example, again, south node is a gibbous opposition to Uranus. The north node is a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. Now, if you're new students and you are just beginning and really trying to determine all of these phases and aspects, this class first before then going back to the July class, and you also would want to have the handout that I just showed before, this handout right here with all of the cycle of phases and aspects. Now, the thing of it is when you're working with comparing a point in space to the planet, these 8 phases are flipped over backwards. It's like you'd put it in the mirror. Go back to this example. You would normally think that this is new phase, but because the nodes go backwards, this is finishing up, this is balsamic. So you really have to learn how to count those 45-degree phases backwards when you are working with a point in space. Now, even though this example doesn't show this, if we are working with the midheaven here, you would start with Uranus at 19 Gemini, and you'd go back 30 degrees, 19 Taurus. You would go back 60 degrees, 19 Aries, but we go to 24 degrees. And so what we have here is the midheaven is crescent phase to Uranus, okay? And I don't know, I'm not doing the math in my head right now and I didn't print it out, but I'm just trying to point out to you that again, start with Uranus and you go this direction to the midheaven. And the midheaven is crescent phase to Uranus, and the math may show an exact aspect. If you start with Uranus and go to the ascendant, you again go clockwise around the chart till you get to the ascendant. And I'm not doing the math in my head here. I'm just trying to point it out to you. It's probably going to be the last quarter phase, or perhaps balsamic phase, looking last quarter phase that it would be. So again, the whole point that I'm just trying to establish here is when it's points in space, nodal axis, ascendant, midheaven, etc., you start with the planet and you go in a clockwise fashion until you get to the point in space. Any questions from anybody with what I'm saying before we move on? We're going to do some specifics with the math. We glanced over it in our July class. We're going to go through it just a little bit slower and more specific. And we're going to do the math. And then I'm going to show you the easy way in solar fire. And I can even show it to you in a little bit in WinStar. I really became an advocate of solar fire when I saw their differential listing that I came across. And so before we do that, though, I also just want to review an aspect that is applying, exact, and separating. So there is a difference. When we're looking at the circle, I'm going to back up here. Nope, I'm going to back up, I think. Excuse me just a minute. When we are working with 0, whoops, sorry, I punched my mouse. When we are working with 0 to 180, in astrology, 0 to 180 is waxing. So waxing includes the first 4 phases: new, crescent, first quarter, gibbous. When we have any 2 planets or a planet in point, from 180 to 360, it's waning. And so that includes full, disseminating, last quarter, and balsamic phases. So I taught myself a long time ago to say waxing and waning because I ran across this method, which originally comes from Dane Rudhyar. All of this that you see right here originally came from Dane Rudhyar from his book, The Lunation Cycle. And Dane Rudhyar's books were, he was one of the few authors that Jeffrey Green actually read astrology books by. And so Dane Rudhyar popularized these 8 phases, just looking at the sun and the moon, and we're very familiar with that out there in society in general, looking at it that way. Jeffrey fine-tuned it into including all the planets, and then all the planets' endpoints in space. So again, 0 to 180 is waxing, 180 to 360 is waning. And we know that symbology from the waxing moon, the waning moon, compared to the sun. You can do it with any planets. So this is why when I said here, look at Mercury again, for example. We know it's a balsamic conjunction, but I put the word waning balsamic conjunction because waning means second half of the circle. Venus is waxing new conjunction. Even though it's a degree past, I left it as a conjunction. New meaning 0 to 180. The other language that we will use with aspects in astrology in general is an aspect, excuse me, is it applying, is it exact, or is it separating? And this is true for any type of aspect. It doesn't matter what type it is. Excuse me for a moment while I take a drink of water. Now, in this example that I've been using throughout several slides here, we were working with planets square the nodes, and I used Pluto and the nodes as an example here. And what I have drawn up is the nodes applying, following the red arrow from Pluto at 16 Virgo to the nodes at 22 Gemini North Node. All right, the nodes are applying square to Pluto. And this is where you see my line in purple matching my print in purple. If you're following that, I'll side trip here just as a review. Of course, we know any planet square the nodes is skip steps, which means that planetary energy or archetype and the nodes themselves are all involved in the skip steps, meaning the ego, the nodes of any soul, is bouncing back and forth and never really fulfilling that planetary archetype and not really fulfilling or learning the lessons represented by the nodes. When a planet is square the nodes, both the north node and the south node have been equally active in past lives, and the skip steps is running back and forth between those two nodes, with again, not really fulfilling or learning the lessons represented by either node and the planet involved. So you start with the planet in evolutionary astrology, and because the nodes move backwards or reverse through the zodiac and houses, they move clockwise. You start with the planet, and as this red arrow shows, you go in a clockwise fashion to see which node you come to. And that is the resolution node. And so in evolutionary astrology, that's the node that the skip steps of that planet must be integrated through in order to move beyond the skip steps and bouncing back and forth. Now, this is true no matter which planet is square the nodes, all right? But what I want to really come across with as an example here, and this is not just true with planets square the nodes, this is true between any two planets, is the aspect applying, exact, or separating. So as we go through future examples, I'll point it out to you. In this example with the nodes at 22 degrees, it is applying square. If the nodes were at 16 degrees Gemini North Node, 16 degrees Sag South Node, it'd be an exact square. If, following the green lines, the North Node was at 12 degrees Gemini, South Node 12 degrees Sag, it would be a separating square. It would have moved beyond the 90 degree and the 270 degree mark compared to Pluto. Now I'm specifically showing you this example with the nodes or as points in space because again, we're doing this in a reverse order from what we would do with planets. Anybody, anytime you have questions that come up for you, you're always welcome to interrupt and type a question out to Leroy. He'll answer if he knows or he'll interrupt me. You're always welcome to interrupt me and ask questions if you need to. And so here again is the listing of the 8 phases. And here is their degree marks for you. They're on the circle that I showed you. But here's a listing for this if you print out the PDF file after class. So you've got this as a simple little list. One of the things that you learn to do as time goes by and working with aspects is you learn 45, 90, 135, 180, 225, 270, 315, 360. Over the years, I have gotten those 8 numbers memorized. And so here's the visual one more time. And as you can see, just like I had them listed before, 0 degrees conjunction, here's the 45, here's the 90, 135, 180, the 225, 270, 315, and 360 all over again. So now I'm going to do a little math. This is going to be repeating what we were working with in July. In that last class, I was finally starting to figure out, oh, let's show them how I do the math, because this is how I have been doing it up until last month in August when we figured it out in SolarFire. And it also helps to just try, as you go along, working with charts as the years go by, you know, eventually you can get to the point where you almost can do it visually. And the way that you learn to do it visually is by counting the signs, because the signs go in 30-degree increments. And that's what I'll show you by this example. And so I think I've got the same chart all the way through these next 3 examples. And I have put red stars around the 2 planets we're looking at. So here we're going to look at the planetary example of Mars in aspect to Saturn. All right. And just visually, because Saturn is the slower moving planet, you can see that you go almost all the way around the chart to Mars. And if you want to, because you can start to know that Scorpio, Sag, Cap, Scorpio is 60 degrees, or Capricorn is 60 degrees from Scorpio, you can just reverse that and go, oh, wait a minute, this is going to be a sextile. It's going to be a 300-degree sextile. So our math is going to follow through on that. But at some point, you learn to be able to work with the visual of this. And it's not always easy to do with the minor aspects, but it is teachable with the semi-squares and sesquisquadrates. And I'm just realizing that I didn't get this slide in. And so what I will do is I'll insert this slide after class for you so that it is in here, making a note for myself. But let's look at the math here for a moment, all right? So how you would do it, and again, I've used a very simple example math-wise so that it's easy to understand. It is the 300-degree sextile. This is not a 60-degree sextile. If Mars was hanging out over here at 2 degrees Pisces, we start with Saturn and we go Aquarius, Pisces, 60 degrees. That's not the case here. Excuse me, just a moment. My throat seems to be a little raw today. Apologies for that. And no cough drops. Sometimes I'll do a cough drop to lubricate my mouth before I speak. So we see that there's the 2 sextiles. There's the waxing sextile. But what we're working with here is the waning sextile, or the last quarter sextile, which is 300 degrees. And so how I will do it is I will start with Saturn at 2 degrees Capricorn, and I'll go all the way around to Scorpio, and I'll get 300 degrees. And you can literally just go around the circle counting the signs, 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180 if you want to. And then I put Mars in, and instead of Mars being at 24 minutes, oh, thank you, honey. Right delivered me a cough drop. So excuse my background noise for just a little bit as I lubricate my throat. But as you can see, if Mars was at 2 degrees Scorpio, 24 minutes, it'd be exactly 300 degrees. But I'll come along and just subtract math, and the minutes, degrees go by 30 degrees each. 12 signs 30 degrees, 12 times 30 is 360, but the minutes go 0 to 60. And we're not talking time here, we're talking space. We're talking latitude, longitude here. So I'll subtract the 4 minutes, and you can take 299 and 60 and you get the 56. So I've kind of shortened a little bit of the math here with this, and I hope it's clear enough for everybody. But let me take you back to the visual. So again, what you can do if you want to, if it's easier for you, is to go Cap, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and all the way around, and you're counting how many signs. You take it times 30, and that's where you can get to a base point in regards to your comparisons. So this is an easy example that I'm starting out with, and I'm deliberately working with the second half of the zodiac here math-wise. Again, questions, you're welcome to interrupt, ask me to explain. I'll go back here again. You can see this visually on your screen, how I just counted the signs of the zodiac and got to the 300 degrees. And then I'm either going to be adding on degrees and minutes, or I'm going to be subtracting degrees and minutes from my nearest 30-degree mark or aspect mark to find out exactly what it is. So if we're 4 minutes away from 300, Mars is applying sextile to Saturn. Remember earlier we were looking at applying, exact, and separating? Mars is applying last quarter sextile to Saturn. Or you can say applying waning sextile to Saturn. Now, something else that I've always had a tendency to do is I tend to describe the faster moving planet first and what type of aspect or phase it's making to the slower moving planet. And it's just a way that I've used to describe it. I don't think there's a right or wrong way, but when I say Mars is applying to a waning sextile to Saturn, then I know that Mars is compared to Saturn. So that's just a little perk of mine that I've worked with over the years with aspects. Now, next example, same chart, but here we're going to look at Neptune and Venus. And if we look at it visually, Neptune, of course, slower moving planet, goes almost all the way around the chart to get to Venus. And if we look at the fact that we can go Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, again, we know that we've already went 300 degrees when we get to 6 degrees Virgo compared to Neptune 6 degrees Scorpio, and Venus is beyond that. So we're at that waning sextile or last quarter sextile of 300 degrees again, but Venus goes beyond it. And so here's how we work the math. Either you are looking at it visually by the signs, or you've counted your 30-degree increments by the signs, or you subtracted 60 degrees from 360. You can do it that way too. And now we've got to figure out that difference between them from Venus compared to Neptune. Here's the aspect. I'm giving it to you ahead of time. And when I had said that evolutionary astrology used wide orbs, anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees on either side, 5 to 10 degrees applying, 5 to 10 degrees separating. When you get to the minor aspects, the harmonics of 7 with the septiles, the harmonics of 5 with the quintiles, when you start to get into those harmonics, you can see a bleed through between aspects when you use orbs that wide. So, for instance, working with the quintiles and the septiles, you can use narrower orbs, or looking at it in a phasal process of one thing leading to the next, you can look at both aspects between those two planets. Now, again, this example with Neptune, we recognize that Neptune was 6 degrees Scorpio, 28 minutes. So we went all the way around the circle to 6 degrees Virgo, 28 minutes. There's our 300 degrees again. But Venus is beyond that. It's 15 degrees Virgo, 26 minutes. So we have 9 degrees further from 6 degrees Virgo going all the way to 15. We have another 9 degrees that we can add on. And so if we look at this, and I'm thinking I have a mistake here on my own. I'm going to come back and look at this. Yes. If Venus was at 15 degrees 28 minutes compared to Neptune's 28 minutes, it would be exactly 309 degrees. And what I think I had to do here was this needs to be an 8. We needed to, it's 58 degrees, it is 2 minutes short. There's where I get my 58. All right. It's 2 minutes short of being completely 9 degrees. So I'll make this a 308 so that when you're watching this in the future, you'll actually get this. So it's 2 minutes shy of being 309 degrees. It's actually 308.58, which is still 308.35, close enough to the actual aspect of what we will call a septile. So Venus is making, all right, a last quarter septile to Neptune, or a waning septile to Neptune. All right. It's clear for everybody in using this again as an example. We got to the 300 degrees. This is where it starts to get a little interesting working with your minutes. But we know that 15 minus 6 is 9. And if this was 28, it'd be exactly 9 degrees, but we're 2 minutes short. So this becomes 299. You put a 60 over here, and well, you get the math. Now, one more example I thought I would show you with the nodes because they move in that clockwise manner. So we have the same chart. Here we're going to look at the nodal axis relationship to Pluto. So Pluto, of course, is the slower moving planet, but it's also the planet when compared to the nodes. And so if we work with Pluto, we go in a clockwise fashion to the south node. We keep moving around to the north node. If you look at it visually, you can see that it's 330 degrees around. And at 330 degrees, that north node, we get to 5 degrees Libra. And we just go backwards 2 more degrees. And so it's 332 degrees. It's a waning semi-sextile that the north node is making to Pluto. And it is separating. If that north node again was 5 degrees Libra, it'd be an exact semi-sextile, waning semi-sextile. But because the north node goes 2 degrees back beyond the 5, goes from 5, 4, 3, it's 2 degrees further. So it's a separating, waning semi-sextile, or a separating balsamic semi-sextile. Here's my math. Mercury retrograde with the last example. Sometimes even I go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and then when I'm describing it, it's like, oh, yeah, that's not right. This one I lucked out. The nodes in Pluto have the same minutes. Maybe that's why I chose that example. But as you can see, Pluto's at 5 Virgo 39. We could reverse through the zodiac. You reverse counting your 30-degree increments with signs. And when we go, start with Virgo, and again, we go Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, Aries, and we reverse back there. We still go all the way to Libra. Count will be 330 degrees. And then we have to go from 5 degrees Libra to 4 degrees Libra to 3 degrees Libra, where the North Node is actually at. And it's at 332 degrees. So as I said, it is the balsamic semi-sextile. All right, that makes sense for you. Now, to just show you with the North Node, even though I didn't do the math here, you would count, from Virgo to Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, Aries. You're counting 150 degrees to get to 5 degrees Aries. And then we've got to add 2 more degrees. So the South Node is a gibbous inconjunct to Pluto. And it is also separating. Your nodal axes aspects are always going to be 180 out to planets. If the North Node sextiles a planet, the South Node trines a planet. In this case, if the North Node semi-sextiles a planet, the South Node's going to inconjunct a planet. And they'll either be, waxing or waning depending upon what side they are from the planet. So this is the math that I wanted to show you. Do I have questions before we move on?
Yeah, Kim, there's a question about the harmonics. We're referring to these, harmonics of 12, harmonics of 7, harmonics of 2, etc. And one of the students wanted to know if harmonics will be covered in this event, in this class today, or kind of an interesting question.
It's an interesting question, and I discovered this a long time ago when I was first studying astrology, and I didn't hear it from Jeffrey, but I always added it in because for some reason I was always left brain and right brain. I have a past life as an astronomer, all right? So I kind of grew up, that language came easily to me, let's say that. I cover the harmonics of the numbers in explaining that in this latest public series that I've been doing. The modalities, the cardinal fixed mutable modality, and then the 4 elements. I actually had a couple of slides on that, in which we divide the circle. Because if you divide the 360 circle by 12, the harmonics of 12, you get the 30-degree aspects. If you divide the circle by 3, you get the trines. You divide the circle by 4, the harmonics of 4, you get the squares. So when you go through in segment 1, the classes April through July, I list all those harmonics. I list all of that. All right. I'm trying to think. I've never really taught a class in which I go from the harmonics of 1 to 12. That could be a possibility in the future. I don't know how this question is being asked exactly. So if you have looked at the classes April through July and it started to make sense for you, great. If not, why don't you send me an email and ask me how you're looking at this and how you'd like me to consider teaching it, and I can definitely take a look at that. Because when, for instance, going back here to the septile, that's dividing the circle by 7. And that turns out to be 360 divided by 7 is about, what, 51 degrees, 25 minutes or something like that. And so you just take that in increments of 51 degrees to get the septile aspects, and there will be 7 of them. And the 0-degree conjunction is always included in any of the harmonics. So am I answering the question okay? I don't know if I'm clear. And
You're fine. You're fine. Yeah, but
okay.
it is an important concept because harmonics are
Mm-hmm.
waves. They're components of energy. They're frequencies, if you will, and it is relevant to the study of astrology on a basic level, but more on a
Yeah.
I guess
Um,
a
here,
metaphysical level, perhaps. Yeah.
yeah. Hold on just a second, because I'm gonna reach over into my library and get the book that where I first saw this written up. Hold on. Because it is so easy to get used books off of the internet today. The astrologer, and this was back in the first year or two. I'd been studying astrology for 2 years before I ran into Jeffrey Green's work. I found astrology in June of 1983, and I found Jeffrey in June of 1985. But for 2 years, I had been buying every astrology book I could come across, and I taught myself how to do charts and how to do aspects just by hand through books. But the astrologer who really used the harmonics of the numbers is Martin Seymour Smith. So Martin, Martin. Seymour was Seymour dash Smith. And his book is called The New Astrologer. And I still have the book. And he's the one, I never, God, when was it published? 1981. I've never met him. I've never read an article by him. I've never seen him in print. I don't have no idea if he's alive or not. But I did find that he was very good at helping me with the math. And so, and he actually, the book actually shows you how to cast charts by hand. So if you're really interested in that type of thing, you could look for that book off Amazon or the other used places. He also had several good visuals of how you get from the sky to the actual circle chart. It's still a book that I have in my library. I don't use it so much for the interpretations anymore, but it is a good book to teach you the math by hand if you're interested. And he's the one who taught me the harmonics of the numbers. Any other questions before I move into the easy part of it, at least for people who have solar fire? All right. Assuming that no questions. All right. And so for those of you who have solar fire software, I have solar fire, WindStar, and Kepler, although Kepler's changed its name now. I think they call their software Sirius or something like that. I do use Kepler Sirius when I'm casting the astrocartography and local space maps. At one point I had decided, well, maybe I should have multiple software programs if I'm teaching it, and I know WindStar the most. I started with WindStar in, I want to say 1986, in the DOS environment. It was called Blue Star, if you can imagine that, way before Windows showed up. And so I've stayed with WinStar through the years, but I've gotten SolarFire and I've been, exploring with it more and more as I have started doing these webinars and creating the slideshows. What you're going to see listed on your screen is the instructions on how to find the difference listing. SolarFire calls it the difference listing, and I keep wanting to say the differential listing. But this is how we're going to go about it, and I'm going to leave the slides and actually show this to you and give you an example about this. And oh my gosh, does it make the world easier? And again, I give great thanks to the student who I was working with, and we stumbled upon this together in wanting to find this in SolarFire. So this has been really good. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to take you through the actual example, we're going to create a chart in SolarFire. We're going to view a chart. We're going to go to reports. We're going to choose the difference listing, and we're going to make sure that we choose a modulus 360. And all that is a 360-degree dial. In astrology, you can have a 30-degree, a 45-degree, a 90-degree, a 360-degree dial. And that's used a lot in horary astrology to just easily tell when planets are in, for instance, 30-degree dials, multiples of 30 degrees from each other, regardless of sign. And so here's the chart that we're going to work with when I go draw it up. Look at today. I drew this chart. I was prepping yesterday, and I thought, oh, wow, we have a Grand Cross going on in class today. So I had to draw it up. So this is the one we're going to look at with our um, difference listing. And as you can see, many of you are familiar with this lunar eclipse we just had and the fact that Pluto is hanging out in a square to Uranus, and it's still with an orb of a square to Venus. And here's the moon in Cancer. So there might be some residual stuff going on from that cardinal cross in April when Mars was finishing up in Libra and Jupiter was finishing up in Cancer. Remember that? That stuff was going on. So again, might be some residual effects to that today. But here's how we're going to look at this, okay? And so I'm going to leave this for the moment. This is my niece Macy Quinn, and here we are in SolarFire, and here's that same chart. So you're probably familiar with SolarFire in knowing how to go in and create a chart. I'm not going to do that. I'll leave the same one that we had. You can see the data right there. So this would be, for instance, you're drawing up a client's chart, and you create the chart in SolarFire, and you have your little list. And so then you highlight it, click on it, double click, and you draw up whatever type of chart wheel you like to have as your default in here. But the next thing that you're going to do is over here is a little handy thing called reports, and you're going to click on reports. And when you click on reports, the first thing that has a tendency to show up, well, there's a bunch of different things that show up. And as a matter of fact, you can find planetary nodes here if you want a listing of the planetary nodes. And so if you want to find north node, south node of Mercury, Venus, or whoever you have in your listing, this is how you find that in SolarFire under reports. Ascending is north node, descending is south node in case you're interested. And SolarFire will even give you some of the aspects that are going on with the nodes. But we're going to continue on in this area, again, called reports. And we're going to continue down to what is called the difference listing. And I already have the modulus set up for 360. But in order to show you this, just to know, Here's the septile. Here's the harmonics of 7. This is all the different harmonics again. 22, that's got to be the harmonics of 13. 30 is the harmonics of 12. I don't know what the harmonics of 32 is. 36, I think 40 is the harmonics of 9. 45, harmonics of 8. And harmonics of 7, harmonics of 6, harmonics of 5, harmonics of 4, 3, 2, and 360 means that they're taking the aspects all the way from 0 to 360. So here's how I want to show you some examples, and I hope that these numbers are large enough for you to see. Give me some feedback, Leroy, because as I've drawn up this difference listing, can you read these numbers between sun, moon, 101 degrees, 10 minutes? Are they clear enough for you to see?
It looks fine. It's going to be interesting to see if it shows as well on the recording, but it looks fine here.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just look at some examples here to show you, because when you set your modulus for 360, all right, you can see that you've got, here's for instance, Saturn, Mercury, 333 degrees, 57 minutes. It goes all the way around the dial, which is what we do in evolutionary astrology. So for instance, if we look at, let's look at Uranus compared to the moon. So if we start with Uranus and we go in a counterclockwise fashion to the moon, we can see that it's pretty close to being a square, probably the gibbous side of the square. So we can go here to the moon, but if you go to this moon Uranus, look what you get, 274 degrees. So you've got to come over here to Uranus first, moon second. Slower moving planet first, faster moving planet second, and you get 85 degrees, 57 minutes. So you can see this fits. It's almost 86 degrees. So you can see that that's the crescent square between the moon and Uranus. All right. So now Uranus and the south node here. Let's go look at Uranus 2, the south node. Here is still what still needs to be changed in astrological software. Let's just say it that way. They're taking they're starting with Uranus and they're going counterclockwise to the south node, and they're saying Uranus south node is 5 minutes. So you have this difference listing that worked really well in a 360 for all the planets, but it is just the opposite for the nodes. And so what you would need to do here, for instance, with Uranus in the south node, is you would need to start with 360 degrees, and you go here to Uranus south node, and you've literally got to subtract the 5 degrees, and it's 0 minutes, but you would subtract the 5 degrees in minutes if you really wanted to get what that was as an aspect from evolutionary astrology's perspective. Now, when we look at it visually, we can see the south node is balsamic Uranus. If we start with Uranus and go clockwise, which is the way the nodes move, we can see it's a balsamic conjunction. So while, again, to repeat myself, this difference listing works really well planet to planet, but it does it the opposite with the nodes. And I'm going to pretty much guess that it's going to do it just the opposite as well with the points in space. Now, I had a thought just hit me. Hold on a second.
What?
Here it is. There it
There it
is.
is.
You got to go just the opposite. Yeah, I knew it flashed on me that it does it both ways. So again, this is just a caveat you're going to have to look at. If we're in our language, this south node balsamic Uranus, you've got to go over here on differential listing and look at the south node to Uranus, even though we would describe it backwards. There's the 3:54 and 59 minutes when they do the math that way. So if you're wanting to look at how north node, south node is an aspect to any planets, look at the listing for north node, south node first. All right, does that make sense to everybody? There, I moved that up just a little bit for you. So let's use another example here. Let's look at Mars to Pluto. All right, if we start with Pluto, we know visually we go counterclockwise all the way around the chart to get to Mars. We know it's balsamic phase just by visually looking at it. So we come over here and we find Pluto and Mars, and it's 340 degrees and 22 minutes. So then we can just go to the listing of the cycle of phases and aspects, if you have that out in front of you, and you can easily then look to see if you're working with, and I'm trying to get one because I didn't print one out today. Nope, I don't think I have one in this little handout. So I'll get another one of my little printouts where I can look at it easily and show you. And I can also go back to this as well. Let me make this easy for everybody. And so we knew that that Mars-Pluto was 340 degrees. Well, the last aspect's 330, so we just know that it's a balsamic phase. There isn't any aspect between that Mars-Pluto. And it's moving towards the balsamic conjunction of 359, 360. And so let me come over here and get this back up for you. To look at another one, let's look at Neptune to Jupiter. Neptune's slower moving planet, going counterclockwise. We can look at this and visually it looks like it's probably going to be gibbous phase. All right. Those of you who are fast with your math can probably figure it out. I'm not always the fastest with that, but you can come over here to solar fire. You can find Neptune first to Jupiter, 163 degrees, 4 minutes. So then you can take that math there and you can go back to here and you can go to 163 degrees. You can see that it is gibbous phase. There's no aspect. It's 9 degrees beyond the triseptile. Again, these quintiles, septiles, it's hard to get to that 10-degree phase for them, maybe 3 to 5 degrees depending. So there's no specific aspect between Jupiter and Neptune, but they are gibbous phase to each other. So they still have a relationship to each other. All right, so is this a good enough example for everybody on how you can look at this through solar fire? This is beautiful. Now, the other thing that you get when you look at this difference listing is I'm going to scroll down here for a moment and hope that my screen picks this up. And I can even, I'll minimize it so that our webinar picks it up. And then I'll do this. You also have every aspect sorted by angle. And when you're using the 360-degree dial, it will go from 0 to 360. So this is also useful, and this is just the bottom half of this difference listing. You can see that Venus and the North Node are only 35 minutes apart. Now in our world, that would be North Node Venus. Here it is just the opposite. So what you're going to find is when you switch the planets around, They're going to be opposite each other till they meet in the middle like the nodes do. But you can see, again, balsamic conjunction and when you flip it over and use the node first. But you can really just at a glance tell. Here's all the planetary aspects that are conjunctions. You can go to 90 degrees. Here's all the aspects that are squares, and you then just have to visually look. Is it a first quarter square or a last quarter square? Of course, the nodes are always going to be the exact opposition, but you can look for gibbous and full phase oppositions. So for those of you who have Solar Fire software, this makes it a pretty easy way to really look. You don't have to do the math on the phases and aspects. It's there for you. Then you can just look at it visually and figure out the phasal relationship of that aspect. And especially if you've got the 45-degree list in front of you. New crescent first quarter. Yes, Leroy?
Not to distract, but what type of wheel style are you using there in Solar Fire 731?
It's a uni, all right? It's up here, it's the uni style. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome with that. Now, this is most of the material that I have wanted to cover in regards to the cycle of phases and aspects in the math review. So I think that this is pretty clear. I'll show you a couple of other things in Solar Fire. And when I discovered this in August, it really cinched it for me that for evolutionary astrologers, Solar Fire gives you the planetary nodes, and now when you can get the aspects on a 360-degree dial, I mean, here's the two ways that we really use evolutionary astrology. Of course, the cycle of phases and aspects that we're looking at now. And then for those of you who care to go into a little more advanced studies, you start looking at the planetary nodes to all the planets. And so I don't know that this orb thing doesn't mean anything when you are going 0 to 360. What you have to look for is, again, the modulus, okay? Because, for instance, let's look at it this way. Let me just do 90. To show you a 90-degree dial, all it's going to do is show you aspects between 0 to 90 degrees. All right? And they're going to fit them to, this is a little more complicated, they're going to fit them to a 90-degree dial. I'll show you a 30-degree dial in WinStar just to show you the difference. But again, I want to make sure you use the 360 in order to get all of it. And as I said before, when you are working with this, and I'll show you this one more time, when you draw up your chart, over here is reports, all right? View reports. That's what brings this up. And then you move through this listing of different ways you can look at things, all right? And evolutionary astrology uses the planetary nodes. The nodes will show up for whatever planets you've drawn it for. I'm just using the major planets and Chiron in this chart. So that's the nodes I have listed. If you use some of the finer asteroids, they'll be listed under planetary nodes, and they'll also be listed under the difference listing if you've included them as well. Now, let me do this. I want to show you the 30-degree dial in WinStar because it's easy to see and show you there. Okay, oops, there, here we go. And can I make it larger? Okay, how do I do that again? How do I do that again? Here's the 30-degree dial, all right? And this is today for 2 p.m., so very similar chart, but it's going to be off a few minutes. And I got to remember, I don't know if I could, oh, here I go. There. All right, and so let me do it one more time. So here's a 30-degree dial, all right? And so what it does is it puts all the planets instead of 0 to 360, it puts them where are they from 0 to 30 degrees regardless of sign. We can see right here Pluto is 11 degrees cap 7 minutes. So Pluto ends up right over here on the 30-degree dial at 11 minutes. Now, Mars, 21 Sag. Mars ends up over here 21 degrees on the 30-degree dial. The Sun is showing up here too, but the Sun's 21 Libra. So again, the 30-degree dial pays no attention to the signs. It's the degrees from 0 to 30. I still use WinStar when I draw up charts for clients because when I'm working with this chart, I have an easy grid of the aspects. And even though I list the minor aspects, when you're in a reading, you don't get to cover everything in an hour or even 2 hours with a client. So this 30-degree dial is very, to me, it's important because when you have a planet, for instance, let's say we have Uranus. We all know Uranus is traveling about 14, 15 degrees of Aries. You can go look here at 14, 15 degrees. Now this is going to be Uranus because this is a transit chart, okay? I can actually show you, I'll show you my chart, okay? Let me work with this quickly if you don't mind me drawing up another chart. You can all see my birthday's coming up.
While you're doing that, Kim, I'm wondering if
Mhm.
is it out of the scope of this class to talk about planetary nodes? We've had a couple of students kind of want to know more about that. It's a little confusing for them. Are we going to cover that in an additional class down the way?
You know what? Let's do that in an additional class. Although I will say this, if you go into the archived audio files, I went through a planetary node series. I used Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's charts. And you can go back and research that. I went through the planetary nodes of Mercury, Venus, Mars. In other words, it's not just the moon that has a south node, north node crossing the ecliptic or the sun's path. Mercury has nodes. In other words, it has points where it crosses the ecliptic going north, north node of Mercury, and crosses the ecliptic going south, south node of Mercury. The only nodes that are exactly 180 degrees apart are the nodes of the moon because it crosses that ecliptic, the sun's path, every 2 weeks. Mercury, Venus, Mars, they take longer time periods, and Jupiter on out through Pluto takes centuries for their nodes to change signs. So I went through that planetary nodes class, but I would be very willing to revisit it on the webinar model. And stay tuned because we're actually in the thought process of adding a segment 4 to our course series, which would be planetary nodes, and that would be co-taught by Mark Jones and myself. Never said that publicly. This is not a public class. This is just students. This is a heads up for you guys. And basically what we're trying to decide is whether or not to do that type of class in person or to actually do it in a webinar format like this, which makes it easy for not having to travel. Now, why is it doing that? I've got something going on. Okay, I'm just going to go this way. Mercury retrograde, I've got something going on with my charts. This is a new program, okay? So I'm just going to go choose, okay, let's choose Tony Bear's chart. Boy, I've really got a Mercury retrograde going on here. Sorry, I don't mean to get distracted on you, but I want to show you this. asteroid wheel. I do love Windstar's different wheels that they're using, but I've really had, I don't know what's going on, and all I can say is, all right, I'm waiting for, it's just, my software program has just really been goofing up. I don't know what to think of this. Okay, I'm going to expose a student. Blake, thank you for letting me use your chart.
There's the right talk about the chart or the wheel style. I think that was it.
Yes, but I go in and choose it, and I've it's been goofing up on me, and who knows what it is. But I think this is close enough for you to see. Now, here's the point that I wanted to show you, and this is a little bit into transits class, so I might include this next month as well. But when you can draw up a 30-degree dial, and you know that Uranus is traveling 14, 15 degrees Aries, I know at a glance that it just got done making an aspect to Neptune. It's still within orb. Neptune's here at 13 degrees, if you can see this mark. And Pluto's sitting right out here at 15 degrees something, probably Libra or Scorpio, depending on his age. And so Uranus is going to make an aspect to Pluto pretty soon just by knowing Uranus is hanging out here at 14 degrees of a sign. So when you have the 30-degree dial that you can draw up with clients and you're looking at forecasting, this is great. Now I happen to know that Saturn is traveling at about 20 degrees Scorpio. I can go to 20 degrees on a 30-degree dial and go, ooh, Saturn is aspecting Vesta, Chiron, Saturn itself, and the moon. Now these aspects are all going to be within 30 degrees. It could be an opposition, it could be a semi-sextile, it could be whatever. Back to Uranus here at 15 degrees Aries. Let's look at where Pluto is. 15 degrees or 1458 Scorpio. And so Uranus is going to be up here at 15 degrees Aries. I know visually with Scorpio then, Pluto, that it's a waxing inconjunct, the gibbous inconjunct that Uranus is making. Back to Saturn, traveling right now today at about 20 degrees, 21 degrees, 22 degrees Scorpio. Chiron. Where is Chiron in this chart? Here's Chiron at Cancer, and Saturn's hanging out right here. It's going to be a waxing trine to Saturn to Chiron is a waxing trine. And on and on it goes. So I do like the 30-degree dials. I'm just not real familiar with how to draw them up in Solar Fire as I have been before. And so I wanted to show you the 30-degree dial, and then there was something else I was going to show you. Does anybody remember what it was? Make my notes. It was just a note in my head that I was going over. Let me go back to looking at this chart and see if it draw. Oh, now I do remember. I do remember. When I work with Solar Fire, I work with this stuff, and most of this is all default background. I do use the standard set of aspects. Standard has a tendency to bring in all of the minor aspects. So you can bring in, as you can see, looking at these visually, you can bring in the quintile by quintile. These are all the different harmonics, even though it's not showing you what it is. You can choose which orbs to use. Leroy, I got somebody walking up to the front door, ringing the doorbell. No. Oh, they're checking the pine beetle. Sorry, they're not. But standard is in most astrology software packages where you can get into using all of the little details as much as you want. So I do use standard, and you can, as you can see when you were, excuse me, I'll do it again, when you were editing it, you can decide how many orbs you want, applying and separating. So those work out very, very nicely if you're working with these and, you know, really wanting to customize it with your own forecasting here. The other thing that I wanted to show you, and this is where I've worked with another student about displayed points. When I'm working, creating my slides here, and well, I've done this with a couple of students now. When you are working with um, homework on charts, and you're looking at this chart and there's just so much going on here, it can be almost too much to look at. You get distracted. And so let's, for instance, look at Pluto and just jot down the fact that, again, this is an event chart, but we're going to look at it as though it is a person. We know we have Pluto in Capricorn, and we know we have Pluto in the first house, which is ruled by Mars. So co-rulers of Pluto are Saturn, which rules Capricorn, and Mars, which rules the first house. Now let's look at that south node, and that's down there in Aries, and it's in the third house. So Aries, ruled by Mars, third house, ruled by Mercury. So if I'm just going to look at Pluto in the south node and its rulers to understand where a soul is coming from, I look for those rulers that I just listed, and I go in here and I've created right at the top, so it's easy for me, my all variables. And I go in here and choose all variable, and I choose to edit. And I want to take out the sun. I want to take out everything that isn't involved in, direct rulership. So I have Pluto and its rulers Saturn and Mars, and I have the south node and its rulers Mars and Mercury. And so I save that, and I've selected all variable. I go in, I do the chart, and here's how I take out every other planet. So this is Pluto in the south node and its rulers. So this is the soul and its ego and where it is coming from. Now, yes, the other aspects and the other planets are involved, but when you're a beginning student of astrology and you're really trying to take out the confusion, this is a way to do it. To just draw up the chart without the other stuff. And you can always add it in. As you knew from, again, looking at Pluto very closely here, we had a conjunction with the South Node and Uranus, didn't we? So I'll go back to my all variable, and I'm going to bring Uranus in. And I select it. Have to draw up a new chart to get it to come up in the big screen. It shows up in this small screen here, but when I want to show up in the big screen, I have to do a new chart. So I can bring that Uranus back in because it's so tight in its conjunction in the south node and work with that if I want to. But you can then do the same thing. You can leave Pluto in, or you can bring in Pluto's polarity point with its rulers and the north node and its rulers, and you can get the evolutionary intent without all the fluff. This is a very good exercise when you really want to be able to focus on planets and their rulers without getting all of the confusion in there. So even though this isn't part of this today's subject, I did want to show you how I do this in Solar Fire. And if you don't have this current settings listed, it's under Preferences and View Current Settings. I took it out. It just toggles back and forth. And so now View Current Settings. And then it makes it very easy to just be able to go into the displayed points. And I created this all variable because as I'm doing 50 zillion charts and slides, I go in and edit this all over the place back and forth and just take out, put in what I want, and then go from there. Questions on that? Again, for me, this just makes it quite easy to take out confusion when you really are looking at specific things in a chart and you don't want the the fluff confusing you.
No, that's really clear, Kim. And I'm just amazed at how great this webinar format is for a class like this. Because if you're just listening to this somewhere, it'd be tremendously confusing. But when you have the visual, and of course you're teaching a lot about Solar Fire software,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, but it really does help to have that
Mm-hmm.
visual. And so we did have another student that wanted you to go back in. She had to leave for a few minutes and cover
Mm-hmm.
where to find the planetary nodes for the other planets other than the moon.
Okay, so when you are in Solar Fire and you've created a chart, you click on the chart and then you go in and you choose reports. And when you choose reports, okay, here's the chart analysis is showing up first. You slide down to the bottom and here's planetary nodes. Now look at this example. See how I took out everything except Pluto and its rulers by sign and house. South node, its rulers by sign house. So when I draw up the planetary nodes to this chart, the only thing that's going to show up is the planets I have selected in the chart. But there's how you find planetary nodes, and here's the difference listing, which is very short because I have very few planets listed in here. All right, now let me show you something else with planetary nodes because we've sidetracked on it. And I will go in here and choose my planets and Chiron. And this time I'll use my chart. All right, so now, whoops, click too many times. So here's my chart. You can see my south node in Taurus, all right? And you can see everything above the horizon, but I've got in here all the planets in Chiron. And so when I do choose reports, and I choose to go down to planetary nodes, here are my actual planetary nodes. Ascending is the north node, descending is the south node. Again, excuse my burp. When you're working with Mercury, Venus, Mars, you're going to find that the nodes move fast enough that they can be in any of the signs. When you start working with the slower moving planets, you will find that all of the south nodes of Jupiter are in Capricorn. Oops, I'll get rid of that click. South nodes of Saturn, Capricorn. South nodes of Pluto, Capricorn. South nodes of Uranus are Sagittarius. South nodes of Neptune are Aquarius. Because Jupiter through Pluto, the nodes travel so slowly, they are almost always in the same sign. South node of Chiron, Aries. And so this is true for many of us generationally. And for those of you who have seen Jeffrey's old lecture on the planetary nodes, all of us having south node of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto in Capricorn means that for many of the souls here on planet Earth, there were many of us who were alive when we had the shift from the patriarchy to the matriarchy. Those of us having this south node of Neptune in Aquarius, in a nutshell, there are many of us who were alive the last time we had the Aquarian age and we remembered the matriarchy. Because the matriarchy was alive and well in the last Aquarian age. And I actually did a lecture on that. I don't think I ever got a copy of that lecture, Leroy. This is something for you. I spoke at an NCGR conference in Ashland, Oregon back in, I want to say the fall of 2004. And I actually lectured on Neptune and Aquarius and the return to the goddess movement in the Aquarian age. I actually did a lecture on that with Neptune crossing over its own south node. But I don't think that's in the astral library, is it? That'd be something that we could check in the NCGR archives, Leroy, if you'd like to make a note, because that'd be something good to put in our astral library. I was supposed to receive a copy of that. I was actually supposed to receive a DVD of it, but I don't think I ever got either one.
Okay. Okay.
And And so I just wanted to just briefly point that out to you. But this is a way to get your own planetary nodes and of course to see a quick glance at the tightest aspects that you have going on between the nodes. And of course, ascending node and descending nodes of Jupiter, well, all of the planets except the moon. They're not going to be 180 degrees apart. They'll be apart by sign, Leo, Aquarius, Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, Aries. But because the nodes of these planets travel so slowly that by the time one node crosses the ecliptic and then the other node does, they've moved through space-time.
Now,
And
can you insert that into the natal chart right there? Or would that be way too much information?
yes, you can. And I ran across those notes and gosh darn, I got to remember where I put them. Yes, you can insert those in. Um, no, that's not going to be it. I'm going to have to research that again. And if somebody listens to this class and they know how to do it very easily, come remind me. I used to know how to do it and I lost those notes and I found those notes and now I got to find them again. I've been going through major cleanings in my office. So yes, there is a way to do it, and if anybody remembers or knows how to do it in Solar Fire, email Kim Marie so I can let everybody else know. We'll post it on our Facebook group if we know that.
Good idea. We also got a repeat about the clarification on that movement from into the patriarchy. What did you say about the node sign having to do with that movement? You mentioned the south node of Capricorn is consistent with 2 or 3 outer planets, right?
Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. All of us are born with the south nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn. The north nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Cancer. So it means that. Now, not every soul who has that was alive, but many souls had who are here today with that south node of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn. Some of these souls were alive back in the day, about 6500 BC, when we had the shift from the patriarchy to the matriarchy, which again, from evolutionary astrology's perspective, was when man realized he was co-creator with women of making babies. South node of Neptune in Aquarius relates very much to some of these souls who have South Node in Aquarius were on the planet 26,000 years ago during the last Aquarian age when worship of the female as the goddess was alive and well. It's not as we most know it today. To me, if you're wanting a book on those subjects, Rianne Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade, is an old classic on that subject. I've even read The Clan of the Cave Bear. Who wrote those? Jean Auel. I have read her entire series. If you remember, she had a sixth book come out more recently and didn't get the great reviews, but I've read all six of those books. And she does do, a fairly good job of describing how we probably lived 25, 35,000 years ago. Any other questions? We wandered a little bit. I thought the subject wouldn't take a full class, and so I thought this is fine with me to answer these few questions on the back end. I'm going to make a note for myself. Planetary node charts and solar fire, and see if I can find my notes on that again.
But at this point, the questions seem to be answered.
All right. All right. And I made a note on the harmonics as well. All right, so you've learned a couple of extra things today. Apologies that my wind star has been acting up. That's been strange for me. I have put it down to Mercury retrograde. And so, wait a minute. I'm going to come back down here to class next month is going to be on forecasting transits, secondary or major progressions, and solar arcs. We'll look at some of the simple math for achieving that, and of course that is easily done today through software. I'll show you how to do it through both Solar Fire and WindStar. And then I'll show you how I work with forecasting with clients, what I draw up when I have a client. And then again in December, we'll use all of the different house systems and the history behind that and the differences and what we use now. Basically, I'll read a chart in any house system. I think that evolutionary astrology works beyond just using potpourri houses. If any of you are still interested, I went back to the basics of the 12 archetypes using the 3 modalities and the 4 elements. We're in process of doing that. We'll do the mutable modality at the end of the month if you'd like to get involved in that one as well as get the first 2. Contact us. We had put these together as a one series and we're in process of breaking it up. So the modality series is $45, the element series is $60. And then you can see some of my general public classes. We'll work with Jupiter retrograde in December. And for those of you who are not aware of this yet, Uranus conjuncts the south node mid-January and Pluto squares the south node mid-January. One's January 12th, January 12th Pluto squares the nodes. January 19th Uranus conjuncts the south node. I'll have a class specifically on that in December as we are starting to move forward and approach that. Any final questions or comments before we end class?
The PDFs on that cardinal modality class and the fixed modality webinar that you just referred to, Kim, they are available on the website as a single item. Just go to that educational webinars page and you can get the PDF immediately after checkout. And just as a reminder for the students, you know, we are pricing the webinars at $15 for the live event, and you still get all the stuff on the back end. But after the live event, they will be $20 on the website.
All right, thank you, honey. All right, everyone. I hope the class has been helpful for you today, and I will see you next month. Adios.